Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. Um, Today we're still in history of horror. We're continuing down, back into the past. And we're finally into the section 1915 to 1929, the pre-30s. On one hand, we're going to go take about half of the silent movie era for the movie side of things. We're finally going to get into Shill, Supernatural Horror and Literature. I keep shaking it. Don't shake it, Drew. It's Lovecraft's book. Because this was written in 1927, right at the end of this, so some of the stuff he's talking about is going to be right about this time. I'm also going to be talking about Lovecraft himself. I actually printed out his bibliography from Wikipedia. All 22 pages of it. A lot of it is, essays and poetry and stuff. Some of it, there's one that sounds so racist. As racist as you can get. I have no idea how I'm even going to handle that. It's not a literature one, it's a poem, according to Wikipedia. I'm going to have to look it up just to ease my mind about it. Hopefully he's using the N-word in a Twain sense, where he's drawing attention to, social injustice and stuff. But knowing his reputation, I'm kind of not thinking that. It's creepy, but I haven't gotten that far yet. I'm not super expert on Lovecraft. I've read quite a bit. I actually pulled my Lovecraft books out, my Arkham House books. Arkham House, Out the Mounds of Madness, and Dunwich Horror. Both, you'll notice, have... Oh, does it even say on here? No, it doesn't. Both, you'll notice on the inside, has S.T. Joshi. I'm still waiting on my S.G. Joshi book to come from Amazon. The Evolution of the Weird Tale? Evolution of the Weird Tale, that's the one I ordered. So... that would have been helpful to have for this section, but it didn't come yet. I only ordered it not too long ago. But I'll probably come back and do hey, this is what S.T. Joshi has to say. S.T. Joshi is Lovecraft's main biographer. He also did biographical work for on Dunsany, and all these oddball ones that... A lot of these oddball ones that Lovecraft is talking about in Shill. That's SHIL, Supernatural Horror in Literature, if that's the acronym I'm going with. He talks a lot about them and how they influenced what and so on and so forth. Hopefully I'm going to come back and do a review of that. My goal for my history, I'm going backwards, decade and period by period and whatnot. My goal is, once I get to the beginning of horror in general, would be, the earliest scary stories that are written down. Obviously, they've gone back to the caveman era, Bronze Age, earlier. I'll go forward and do a wrap-up. Like, as you can see, this did this, and I might do a video or two, maybe three. I don't know how long it'll take, but in forward and fast forward. That's confusing. I'm going to go forward from the beginning of horror to present in fast forward, an edited version. And I'll probably try to bring up S.T. Joshi's Evolution of the Weird Tale when I'm talking about this stuff again. Because hopefully I'll have time to read it by then. So today we're going over 1915 to 1929. So the 15 years before 1930. Because we did 30s last time. The last two videos, one for movies and one for lit. 1915 to 1929 is essentially the last half of, well, 1930s in movies backwards from 1930s. Anything before 1930s is essentially the silent movie era. I'm going to try to do the last half of the silent movie era here, 1915 to 1929. Then the first half of the silent movie era, 1900 to 1914. And then the very first motion pictures, just, the very first motion pictures in horror, which are usually shorts. They didn't full length. It took them a while to get up to full length motion pictures, as you would think, just because of technology. More than one reel motion pictures. Back when they were using reels, you guys can understand the technology of that. A reel is you can only get a certain amount of time on a reel, and it's probably not a whole movie. It's not a full feature length work. So today I'm going to quickly go. I'm going to go backwards. I decided on a whim. From 1929 to 1915. I should have gotten some more pictures for this. Oh well. 1929. There's two movies that. Oh, I'll put this up first. This is where I'm getting my information, folks. I'm going to pause here. I'm not that good at video making, and I hope you guys aren't trying to click the screen, because these aren't links for you. They're just, it's a JPEG that I put up here, and so you can't click on them. If I get better at video making, I might try to put the links on here, or I'll just mention the links underneath. Hopefully, something along those lines. But I talked about Angel Fire, this Angel Fire slash Dark Side slash Realm of Horror slash History 1 or 2 or 3 .htm as being a good reference for the silent movies is what that's page 1 is. Then the second one was the 30s, then the third one was the 40s, and the fourth one was the 50s, etc. Up to the 70s or 80s, I think it went. Maybe the 90s. So it's a nice little reference, and I recommend that page. It was very helpful to me for coming up with this stuff. Also, IMDb. Oh, excuse me. Pardon me. IMDb has user-generated lists. I did find quite a few of them, as you can type in here. These are essentially horror movies of the 20s and 30s, or 20s, or 1895 to 1919, or 1895 to 1930. Some are larger than others, some are more extensive than others, some explain more than others. Some of them don't explain anything. A lot of these on the list had a German title, and it didn't give me any plot description, so I basically just skipped them. Because I don't have any clue. I've never heard of this movie before. It's from 1918. It's in German. I don't have any plot description. I have no idea what it's about, and the title's in German, so I can't even guess. So it was very confusing on some of these. But I did filter out things that looked interesting, had names that I recognized, or were movies that I recognized. Not a whole lot of movies that I recognized from this period, but between these links, gave me this list. In 1929, we're going to start with Disney's The Skeleton Dance, which was released in 1929. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. The xylophony skeletons dancing in the graveyard. It's a classic. It's not horror. It's Disney. But it's give me the willies as a kid, which is sort of the point. So, if we're being loose, and I don't mind being loose with my definitions, it's horror-esque. So, I'll have fun with that. Also in 1929, the other one that came up was The Mysterious Fu Manchu. It was on a Sax Rohmer. He does talk Lovecraft does talk about Sax Rohmer a little bit. I'm not sure to what degree, and if he means Fu Manchu stories in that. But actually, the first Fu Manchu story is 1913, so I'll basically talk about it more in the 1900 to 1914 video that will be coming up. Hot water. And I think I mentioned one of the Fu Manchu stories in the 1930s video, maybe one in the 1940s video. Sax Rohmer wrote Fu Manchu stories up until the 1950s when he died. And then other people took over for him afterwards. So, pretty successful film and book series. 1928, we have our friend Alfred Hitchcock. Did a movie called Easy Virtue. It was a thriller. It wasn't horror per se, but it was a thriller. One that keeps popping up over and over again on all these lists. I wish I knew more about it. Just because it pops up on everybody's list, I suppose I should watch it at some point. It's called The Man Who Laughs. Wish I could tell you more. I wish I had the video. Didn't get the screenshot or the movie poster. But 1928, The Man Who Laughs. You can IMDb it. I didn't recognize any directors that I recognized or actors, but it was one that popped up on everybody's list. The Fall of the House of Usher. It's a Poe story. That was also 1928. When we're going back to 1927, we start seeing more of our directors. Todd Browning has two movies from 1927, both with Lon Chaney. One is called London After Midnight, and one is called The Unknown. Todd Browning, of course, from Freaks in the 30s, and Dracula with Bela Lugosi in the 30s. He started with Lon Chaney in the 20s, doing silent movies. Cat and the Canary. It's the earliest version thus far of that trope in horror movies or horror stories where you have to go to the creepy old house to listen to the will of your dead uncle or whatever. That trope, I suppose, meme, yeah. Metropolis, Fritz Lang. Fritz Lang pops up everywhere. He was in the 30s, he's in the 20s. Metropolis is probably his most famous work. It's not horror, it's weird and it's sci-fi, but it's weird enough that it usually pops up on these lists. And we have Hitchcock, probably in one of his earliest suspense ones, The Lodger. That's also 1927. The premise is the landlady suspects her tenant is a murderer. So I'm surprised Hitchcock started that early. I didn't know that until I did research on this stuff, but it's cool. All right. 1926, we have F.W. Murnau, who we'll see later on. He did Faust, which of course is your overreacher plot. I don't even know who did the first ones of Faust. I know Goethe did. Who did Faust before Goethe? Was it, not Bacon. What's his name? The guy that people think wrote Shakespeare, it wasn't Shakespeare. Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe. I think he did Faust. I don't know if it's earlier than him. I don't know if his is the same as Goethe's, but whatever. Faust by Murnau. F.W. Murnau. Another one is The Man Who Cheated Life, 1926. It's a remake of Student of Prague. We did Student of Prague. I talked about Student of Prague when I did the second Vision video, which chronologically for me was yesterday because I'm doing these way out of order. It's just the way it's going because I have to redo all of the things with the headphone because the first time I redid the videos was with the mic that came with the laptop, which is awful. So I'm doing it on this thing. So yesterday I redid that one, and now I'm talking about it again today, so it's kind of weird. 1925, still going backwards, Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney, and then we have Todd Browning and Lon Chaney, again, in The Unholy Three. That was more of a suspense, it's a crime thing. But Phantom of the Opera, of course. And I think that'd be the classic. Oh, I should have got the picture for this one. Oh well. Well, you've seen it before. It's the classic black and white silent movie version of Phantom of the Opera. Oh yeah, 1924. Another one that pops up on all the lists, but I don't have any information on it, is Waxworks. I don't think I've seen it, but it's ringing a bell. I've seen so many things about wax museums and House of Wax and blah blah blah. There's hundreds of them out there. This might be the first one. Might be one of the first few anyway. The second one on the list was The Hands of Orlac. Over the weekend, I read a book version of the Fiend with Five Fingers, or I listened to it on my from LibriVox. This is sort of a takeoff on it. A pianist who's gets his hands injured, so he gets his hands replaced with the hands of a dead guy, but they're a strangler's hands, a murderer's hands, the hands of Orlac. And he starts wanting to kill people, which is fun. 1923, Lon Chaney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Again, not necessarily horror, but with makeup and creepy people out, it ends up on the lists. Warning Shadows, which we talked about also with the second Fission video about the puppet master the shadow puppeteer who dissuades the suitors from hitting on the Duke's wife because the Duke would hurt him. But did the puppeteer have anything to do with it at all? Yeah. So Warning Shadows. And Monkey's Paw, the W.W. Jacobs story, who's the classic, the three fingers of the Three Wishes. Um, if you're like me, were forced to read it in high school. The Monkey's Paw. um, Going backwards, one that popped up on all the lists as well is called Haxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages. It's a documentary. I don't know anything about it. It looked weird, but Haxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages documentary, apparently. 1922, Nosferatu, F.W. Murnau and Max Schreck. It's Nosferatu. Everybody knows Nosferatu. And of course, at this time, they were sued by Bram Stoker's widow. But of course, the originals survived, so we have the copies around. I have the copy in the other room. That's part of a series. Fritz Lang pops up again with Dr. Mabuse. I talked about Dr. Mabuse's number 4 or whatever in the 1930s with Peter Lorre. But it started back here in 1922. This one was weird. 1922, Will Rogers in The Headless Horseman, playing Ichabod Crane. The Washington Irving story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, with Will Rogers, the cowboy, as Ichabod Crane, the school teacher. I got nothing. I'm sure it's good. I would be surprised if it wasn't good, but it's weird. This is the first horror comedy. We're going back to 1921. I see my first horror comedy. The Haunted House. Buster Keaton. Apparently, from the description on IMDb, a banker, inherits a house from his uncle or something. But it's taken over. It's supposedly haunted, but really it's a thieves' hideout. So Buster Keaton. Horror comedy. 1921 also has The Phantom Carriage. I just was struck by the story synopsis that was on here. According to legend, the last evil person to die in a year has to drive the Phantom Carriage collecting souls for the whole year until the next year when someone dies on New Year's Eve who's evil. It seemed striking. 1920, we have probably the one that pops up on the list the most, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Classic. No one's denying that. Everybody's agreeing with that. Yeah. Do I have that? Oh, I do. I have the picture for it, too. Cool. Oh, no, wait. This is probably not the... This is not the right one. This is the different one. I'll get rid of that then. Anyway, sorry. Get rid of that. There we go. But the original Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the John Barrymore version, going back even further, 1920. Both 1920 and 1915 have a movie with Peter Wagner called The Golem, and Peter Wagner plays the Golem in each. I think it's German, or well, it would be if it takes place in Prague, I would assume it's there, but Peter Wagner plays the Golem. The 1920 version, which is the one I have here, has a character for Rabbi Lowe, who is the creator of the Golem. If you know the story, a rabbi gets clay together, forms it into a man, puts the name of God, the secret name of God, in its mouth, creates the golem. So the golem walks around and protects the Jews of the city. Rabbi Lowe famously did that, or supposedly did that. I don't think he actually did, but legend as it were. All right, so let's jump back to 1918. Alron, Alruane, Alraune. A devil woman is bad for men. She's the spawn of Satan. A child of forced mating between a woman and a mandrake root creates a sex goddess or whatever that is awful for men. It just sounded so weird I had to mention it. 1916, The Picture of Dorian Gray, the first version of that. Oscar Wilde story. 1915, which is the first year of our little recap here. The Golem appears again, also with Peter Wagner as director and star as the Golem. This one didn't have a character for Rabbi Lowe, so I don't know what was going on. And also something called Les Vampires. Les Vampires. It's a crime drama, so it instantly became less exciting. Crime drama where the criminals are called the vampires. Les Vampires. That was what I had for the first half of pre-30s horror movies. Yes, I want to save changes to that, actually. Next, we'll be going on to Lit in this general area. I'm basically going from his chapter 10 backwards. His chapter 10 would be modern for him, and then he's going back in time from there. Sort of. Because really, his last 3 chapters are all the same time period. Modern Masters is chapter 10. The Weird Tradition in Britain is chapter 9. The Weird Tradition in America is chapter 8. For Lovecraft. But the British and the American people who are in chapters 9 and 8 are at the same time as the Modern Masters. The Modern Masters are just the best 4. Arthur Machen starting on page 88, Algernon Blackwood starting on page 95. Lord Dunsany, pardon me. Edward Plunkett is the Lord Dunsany, and Montague Rhodes James starting on page 100. That's his Modern Masters. Now, they were active during this time, for the most part. All of their most famous stuff, the stuff they're most famous for, is turn of the century. So, Dunsany's most famous works are turn of the century. Blackwood was active throughout, up until his death in the 50s, with ghost stories and other stories. But John Silence and that sort of stuff was also turn of the century, 1910s. John Silence is probably his most famous character. Arthur Machen, in this period he had, from 1915 to 1929, he only had one real horror story, and the rest he was working on other stuff. And M.R. James, he had quite a bit in here, but his most famous work is Ghost Stories from Antiquity, and more Ghost Stories from Antiquity, and other stuff like that. And that was 1910s, 1900s. But I do have. What do I have? I have that here. Modern Masters. Um, Arthur Machen. Did I spell that right? Yeah. The Terror was written in 1917, and basically the rest of the time he was working on his 3-part autobiography, which is cool. I have no problem with that, but it doesn't give me a whole lot to talk about, does it? Algernon Blackwood did have quite a bit of stories in this. Some collections: Day and Night Stories, 1917, Tongues of Fire, 1924, Garden of Survival was a novel, 1918, Promise of Error was a novel, 1918. Julius Vallon and its sequel, The Bright Brett Messenger. I did want to find out what that was about. It seemed weird. It was like a, not horror, but definitely supernatural, investigative sort of thing, which is what Algernon Blackwood is most famous for, but not a copy of John Silence. John Silence was a paranormal investigator, essentially, a Sherlock Holmes plus ghosts, if you wanted to be oversimplify, which I like to do. If you haven't noticed, it's not all John Silence was about, but that's what he's most famous for. But Julius Vallon and The Bright Messenger were sort of, reincarnations, past life regression, mystery, investigation, and supernatural stuff going on, and witchcrafty, elemental stuff. Spiritualism, I guess. And that seemed pretty cool. Not something I don't think will be on my list anytime soon, but it seemed cool. Lord Dunsany, Edward Plunkett, had 3 things during this time. His main body of work for horror fans was back 10, 15 years from now, 1890s. Of course, we'll talk more about him earlier, or next videos. But for now, he had 3 short stories from this time, short story collections from this time: Tales of Wonder, 51 Tales, and Tales of 3 Hemispheres. And then Montague Rhodes James, A Thin Ghost and Others, 1919, A Warning to the Curious and Other Ghost Stories, 1925, and The Tale of the Wailing Well, 1928. For what Lovecraft calls modern masters. Pardon me. Nope. I'm going to start with, yeah. So, jumping back to Chapter 9, and, well, Chapter 9, of course, he's not necessarily going in alphabetical order. Lovecraft isn't necessarily the most scientific. He gets listy after a while. I hope I mentioned that before. It gets, and he's telling people of his time, hey, go out and read this guy, and then read this guy, and then this guy. Which makes sense. That's what you would expect him to do. And he wrote this in 1927, so most of the stuff that would be readily available in 1927. And I'll make a note. I'm making a note now. Coming forward, most of the stuff that we're going to be talking about will be in public domain, which means you can get it for free online at Project Gutenberg. You could probably find LibriVox versions of stuff. LibriVox.org is the free audiobook site. They all do public domain audiobooks. and I frequent them a lot, so I usually go on and see, hey, can I get this stuff on audiobook because I'm interested in it. And they're getting more and more Lovecraft stuff all the time too, since most of his stuff is now coming into public domain. Of course, it has to be public domain, so anything before 1923 is fair game, for the most part, give or take. Everything after 1923 is going to be more difficult. So, of course, you won't find this in public domain on LibriVox because it's not public domain. Or it's owned by Dover or something along those lines. I'm not really sure on the laws. But when he's chapter 9, we're talking about, because this chapter 10 was Modern Masters. Chapter 9, we're going to be talking about the weird tradition in the British Isles. He does get listy, and some of the stuff is a lot more easy to find than others. That's what this line is, by the way, in the middle. The above the line is pretty easy to find. Below the line is pretty difficult to find. In that it's confused me. Wikipedia confused me on some of the stuff. Walter de la Mare is a mixed bag. Walter de la Mare is the most famous person on that list, I'm pretty sure. James Metcalfe is pretty famous too. Not as famous as Walter de la Mare. But it was difficult to find stuff with Walter de la Mare. His collections all came out in 1929 and 1930s. So I was like, well, how did Lovecraft even know about him? He wrote this in 1927. So I had to go back and, well, obviously his stories weren't published in collections first. They were published in, Weird Tales, where Lovecraft is being published, etc. Or the British equivalent of Weird Tales. So okay, that makes sense. And I was actually able to find Walter de la Mare stuff on LibriVox. But I'm going to go through the ones I found easiest. E.F. Benson, Visible and Invisible, and Spook Stories. And I have the page number. This 81, 81, 82, etc., etc. That's the page number that you can find it in Shill. If you go to those pages in here, you'll find what he talks about. So he's probably talking about specific stories, and I'm usually finding collections. Just so you know. And you can probably find a lot of these in, well, depending on the date. If it's before 1923, you can probably find it in Project Gutenberg, or as the blue highlights say, LibriVox. Oh, if it's after 1923, you could probably find some of it, some of the earlier versions, earlier release stuff on Gutenberg. Or other, there are other. Wikisource is actually a good one too. I found a lot on Wikisource. On Wikipedia, if you click on, say, oh, they have it right here, and then you can read it right on the Wikipedia page. But anyway, E.F. Benson, Visible and Invisible, and Spook Stories. H. Russell Wakefield, Return at Evening and Old Man's Beard. Those are both, I think most of these in here are collections. Except for one, which I'll get to. Portrait of a Man with Red Hair, by Hugh Walpole. John Metcalfe, The Smoking Leg and Other Stories, 1925. L.P. Hartley, Night Fears was 1924. That was a collection of short stories. And then the one that Lovecraft talks about is A Visitor from Down Under. That's 1926. And then the other ones I couldn't find as easily. H.G. Everett did his short stories in 1920. Mason Clare had a group of uncanny stories in 1923. Mason Clare I did find on LibriVox, but the one story on LibriVox wasn't a horror story at all. It was sort of a drama-y romance, weird period piece. I enjoyed it, I guess, but it wasn't anything horror. Sounds confusing. But Uncanny Stories are the ones you're after, not just anything by Mason Clare. Walter de la Mare. One of the few... When Lovecraft gets listy, he'll go... Some people will get, a paragraph. Some people will get a paragraph shared with 3 other people in one paragraph. And then 1 page for Walter de la Mare. Or, other people that he's really wants to talk about in some detail. Just the amount of detail he wants to put into it. Obviously this makes sense, but for me, transposing it onto you guys, The Return was 1922. You can find that on LibriVox.org if you wanted to listen to it as opposed to just read it. So I'm sure you can find it on Gutenberg as well. All Hallows, 1926. Seaton's Aunt, 1923. That's also available on LibriVox. A Recluse, 1926. Out of the Deep, 1923. And Mr. Kemp, 1926. I think these are the ones that Lovecraft mentions, particularly. So those are the ones I went and searched out particularly and found some. But doing searches alone on Walter de la Mare, you only get collections, and you only get the collections that were released in the 30s. From Wikipedia page, for instance. H.B. Drake, The Shadowy Thing, 1928. Arthur Ransome, The Elixir of Life. He's fairly well known too. This is one that Lovecraft called... Oh, what did he call it? Barry-esque, I think was the term. Oh no, maybe I'm getting him confused with somebody else. Yeah, I am getting him confused with something else. Cold Harbor by Francis Brett Young. And Gerald Biss, Door of the Unreal. Now that one I'm really interested in checking out because that one's apparently one heck of a awesome werewolf book. And if you haven't figured out by now, I'm kind of werewolf fan. The latter handles quite dexterously the standard werewolf superstition. I'll probably have to check that out. I did find it wasn't your standard Project Gutenberg or Wikisource. It was some obscure one, but I think I found it for free on the internet. I usually don't like reading on the internet for long periods of time. It hurts my eyes. I much prefer audiobooks or reading in book form. But I think I'll have to check that out, at least in part. I kind of like werewolves, so... Oh, I'm going to talk about... Oh yeah, I'll talk about that stuff later, too. Because the 3 authors that Lovecraft's not handling in detail are, Lovecraft himself, Robert E. Howard, which I'm going to continue talking about because he's one of my favorites, and Clark Ashton Smith to continue what I was talking about. And they're all friends, so it's kind of cute to talk about them together. Right. So let's going on to the American version of The Weird Tradition in America, or the U.S. Weird Tradition in America. Irving S. Cobb, The Unbroken Chain, was said to be the 2... Actually, I didn't do page numbers for the Americans. That's not very helpful. I'll do page numbers on the side. I'll say them out loud. Irving S. Cobb, page 73. The Unbroken Chain was said to be a model for Lovecraft's Rats in the Walls. I don't know if that's Wikipedia's claim or Lovecraft himself's claim. I should probably check it out myself. 73. It doesn't say that. Wikipedia was certainly implying it, though. And then his earlier work, Fishhead, was said to be the model for Lovecraft's Shadow over Innsmouth. I don't know if that's the case either. That's not something that Lovecraft is corroborating as of yet. Not in Shill, not in this one anyway. But he does speak highly of Irvin S. Cobb. As to whether the Unbroken Chain is the model for Rats in the Walls and Fishhead is the model for Shadow over Innsmouth, I'm not sure. Leonard Klein, Dark Chamber, 1927. And Edward Lucas White, the Song of Sirens, 1919, and Lakundu and Other Stories, 1927. Lakundu sounds very familiar to me. I didn't do enough research to know why it sounds familiar to me, but there you go. Anyway, again, the line, these above were the easier to find, below were the more difficult to find, meaning that they didn't really have Wikipedia pages attached to them. It was kind of weird, couldn't find much about them. 1927, The Place Called Dagon by Herbert S. Gorman kind of reminds me of Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft in 1917 or 1919 was the date it was published. I don't know if that was a takeoff. Actually, I can tell you because I'm supposed to be giving page numbers on these, aren't I? Oh my, I'm so falling behind. Leonard Klein was also page 73. Herbert S. Gorman was 74. So let me see what Dagon is about. I don't think it was a straight sequel or straight Lovecraftian takeoff, but Lovecraft seemed to like it either way. Western Massachusetts backorder, where the Salem witches' descendants still live. And also 74 is Leland Hall's The Sinister House. Which is which you'll find in Shill. On occasion, you'll find these backhanded compliments of Sinister House. Has touches of magnificent atmosphere, but is marred by a somewhat mediocre romanticism. So, some positives and some negatives about the Sinister House by Leland Hall. Is that what it was? No, it wasn't. This is the paper I was after. Oh, yes. So, now we're on to the three I want to talk about. So who first? Let's do Clark Ashton Smith first. I kind of screwed up last time when I was talking about the 30s. I said, oh, Clark Ashton Smith had some stuff in the 30s, but a lot of it was in the 20s. No, it was the other way around. Clark Ashton Smith had a lot of stuff in the 30s, but not, maybe some of his earliest stuff was published in the 20s. But most of it was collected in the 30s or published in the 30s. 1926 to 1935 is his period of weird fiction. Up to 1926 is his period of poetry. And then after 1935, as I mentioned before, after his parents died in 1935-ish, and Lovecraft died in 37, and his buddy Robert E. Howard died in 36, his two writing buddies and his parents all died in like a 2-year span. He didn't write anymore after that. He went and did painting later on in life, and his painting is sort of weird. But his weird fiction was 1926 to 1935, so mostly in the 30s, actually. Oh, by the way, you can find some of his poetry on LibriVox.org if you're interested. I wonder where Lovecraft got most of his information, because he mentions him in Shill as part of the weird tradition in America, and then it got to be friends after this was published. And during this is published. Shoot, good point. I wanted to recommend, or re-recommend, the documentary on Lovecraft called Fear of the Unknown. I watched it about a week ago on YouTube. It was very good. It had S.G. Joshi in it, Neil Gaiman, Peter Straub, Ramsey Campbell. I can say it. Anyway, I re-recommend that. He will talk more about what was going on, his periods as stuff, which explains it a lot better than I do, because Joshi knows his stuff a lot better than I do. So S.T. Joshi, and of course you can read the, if you get one of these volumes, if you find it, I recommend it. The note on the text is by S.G. Joshi. For, At the Mountains of Madness, case of Charles Dexter Ward. All the stuff we're going to be talking about today. Well, not Mountains of Madness, we talked about that last time. But I'm curious where he got most of the stuff on here, because most of the stuff wasn't during this time. I didn't actually write it down. So Clark Ashton Smith did do a lot of mythos stuff. Trying to pronounce mythos characters are ridiculous. One of them was the avatar of Yog-Sothoth, the world of the Arctic, where the dinosaurs were around, Yeti-type monsters and stuff. Very cyclopean. I love that Lovecraftian word. Sort of feel to it. But Clark Ashton Smith is not someone I'm really that familiar with, so unfortunately I'm going to have to cut him short. But definitely part of the fixture in this kind of genre. And of course, Robert E. Howard also from a mythos perspective. Not a lot of mythos stuff more in the 30s. He got into mythos stuff more. In the 20s, actually I'm going to Robert E. Howard now. Actually, this is stuff available on LibriVox.org. Solomon Kane stories. You'll find Red Shadows, which was the first with his sidekick, Nalonga, the witch doctor type guy who can go into other person's bodies, possession stuff through meditation. Medicine Man, Shaman, Nalonga. Rattle of Bones, another Solomon Kane. Skulls in the Stars, another Solomon Kane. 1928 for Red Shadows, 1929 for Rattle of Bones and Skulls in the Stars. All Solomon Kane stories. All available on LibriVox. My favorite of the Robert E. Howard ones, unsurprisingly, was the werewolf one. Dementor, the Norman werewolf. I'll Also on LibriVox, you can get a lot of the Conan stories, and a lot of them have weird elements. They're very, the monsters are what the monsters are, and you can think of, Conan the Barbarian the movies. Conan the Cimmerian is the stories. Conan the Barbarian the movies. The bad guys are kind of weird fiction, weird tales guys. Some of the stuff was published in the same books that's published, the same magazine that published Lovecraft stuff. So there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of influence of that kind of story in Conan the Cimmerian. I'm not going to mention Conan so much. It's not horror-ish. Solomon Kane, he's fighting vampires. He's fighting, his buddy is a shaman who can possess people or possess dead bodies. It's kind of intense stuff. De Montour the werewolf, he's a werewolf. This is in the Forest of Villefear is the first De Montour story. It was good. It was alright. Wolf's Head is the other one. There's only 3 in the series, and one wasn't published until '88. Wolf's Head was 1926. In the Forest of Villefear was 1925. Wolf's Head was very racist up front on that one. If you can get past the racism, it's a really good werewolf story. It's a very cinematic werewolf story. The scene where he turns into a werewolf, De Montour is warning everybody to go to bed, lock their doors, and whenever the so-and-so doesn't lock the door, they end up a victim. Obviously. Because he's trying to protect them. He's saying, don't leave your door unlocked, don't leave your room at night. Stay in your room. I'm warning you. Not because I'm a werewolf, but because something bad will happen to you. I'm worried about you. He's saying this to everybody. And of course, when someone doesn't leaves their door unlocked or leaves the room, they get killed. So eventually, they set up a posse to catch the guy who did the murders, as you would, with their muskets and their sabers. And the Montour is saying, you guys have to go to bed now. You gotta go and lock your room. The moon's about to rise, or something like that. So it's a very cinematic scene. I'm not sure it's really written this cinematically, or it's just my brain translated it into such a great scene. But it was a great scene. I actually see the darkened hallway where they're all speaking around a torch. De Montour is like trying to even hold himself back. It's like, you guys gotta run. Lock your doors. Go now. And you could see the moonbeam racing down the hall towards them. And De Montour is like, alright. He's actually holding his arms. He's stretching out, grabbing onto something, the door frame. And guys run. And then the moonbeam hits him. His body explodes and the werewolf jumps out of him. I was like, man, I could see it. They have the CGI available now to do that. Such a great scene. It's so perfect. I've not seen the werewolf transition in movies really interests me. Sometimes some are really good, some are crap. But that would be just perfect. Just body exploding, and out of the explosion a werewolf jumps out. Whoomp. That's cool. And then it sort of ends badly. I don't like the ending. I'm not going to ruin it for you, but it's definitely worth a read. If anybody's at all interested in werewolf stories, definitely check out De Montour's Werewolf by Robert E. Howard. Wolf's Head is the big one. It's really racist, though. Between Lovecraft and Howard on this stuff, it's ridiculous. I mean, they grew up in the 20s. Howard grew up in Texas. So it's like, okay, I sort of get it. It's to be expected, but Oh my god. Please stop. Which brings us to Lovecraft. I do have Lovecraft's bibliography from Wikipedia, all 22 pages of it. And some of this, I did find some of the stuff in here. There's one in here that has the title of the N-word in it. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Hopefully he's using it in a, same way Twain used it, but I kind of doubt it, unfortunately. So I'm just going to jump into his actual fiction stuff. I'll mention, when I mention something that is available on LibriVox, I'll point it out. Yeah. Okay, so the big ones that were from this time was Dagon, 1919, which is available on LibriVox. Beyond the Walls of Sleep, 1919, also available on LibriVox. The Doom That Came to Sarnath, I have actually listened to that one and enjoyed it. It's 1920, LibriVox. Statement of Randolph Carter is a classic. Actually, I read it and I listened to it on LibriVox, and the version on LibriVox was pretty cool. It had special effects on the thing, which is, for an amateur doing it, is pretty cool. And it's pretty creepy, actually, because I wasn't expecting it. He made an old-fashioned telephone voice. He must put a filter on his mic to make it old-fashioned telephone voice, and it creeped me out. The Cats of Ulthar, also available on LibriVox. Nyarlathotep, of course, also available on LibriVox. Ex Oblivione, LibriVox. The Music of Eric Zahn, I didn't know was on LibriVox, but is. I haven't listened to it, but I've definitely read it. Oh my god. I said that ghosts scare me more than anything, and Lovecraft is scary in his non-ghosts. So Lovecraft doing ghosts, oh my god. Music of Eric Zahn. Whew. That one kept me up a solid 3 days, just that one. Herbert West Reanimator, I started listening to today. I downloaded it the other week, and started listening to it, but I realized I only had the first half, or the second half, without the first half. So I went back and started listening to the first half. Also available on LibriVox, obviously, since I said I'd download and started listening to it. The Lurking Fear, not available. Rats in the Walls, not available. This is 1923-1924 era. Cool Air, The Call of Cthulhu, and Pickman's Model. Pickman's Model apparently is available, but I don't know why, because it's late 1920s. The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, during this time as well. Color Out of Space, another classic, and The Dunwich Horror. Those three are not available yet. Okay, so I'll just quickly go over the ones that are available on LibriVox. These are available on LibriVox. Not necessarily the most famous from the time, but The Shunned House. The Tomb. The Reminiscence of Dr. Samuel Johnson. Polaris. Memory. The White Ship. The Street. The Terrible Old Man. The Tree. Celephaeus. The Picture in the House, which is pretty well known. The Facts Concerning the Late Arthur German and His Family. The Nameless City. Sweet Ermengarde. Hypnos. The Shunned House I mentioned. The Crawling Chaos was from this collaborator section. Winifred V. Jackson. Oh, and I did listen to Poetry in the Gods, Anna Helen Cross. And one that's not on the LibriVox, but I'm going to mention, which was another collaboration, was Under the Pyramids. And I'm mentioning it because the collaborator was Harry Houdini. Lovecraft and Harry Houdini collaborated on a story? What? What's going on here? I don't know, but I have to check that one out. It might be crap. I don't know. Harry Houdini is not known as a writer. But Under the Pyramids. Lovecraft, of course, collaborated quite a bit. Is there anything like poetry-ish that can pop up on the thing? There was some poetry from him on there, but I think it was basically the big stuff. Do I even want to go into the plot of anything? I've been talking for an hour and 10 minutes. I can't not recommend Lovecraft. Color Out of Space, probably it's essentially a color from space that starts taking over people or starts harming people. Not quite mythos, it's more science fiction-y or set up that way, but it's definitely Lovecraft feel to it. Call of Cthulhu, 1926, or 1928 rather. Written in 1926. Case of Charles Dexter Ward, his first novel. Published in 1941, so Dunwich Horror, which is right in there as well. Rats in the Walls, as I mentioned, was said to be based on Irving S. Cobb. I don't know if that's the case. I could have swore I listened to that one, though. Maybe I did. I must not have. Is it in? Maybe I just read it in one of these. Ooh, the Shunt House is in here, too. Rats in the Walls in this one? Yeah, Rats in the Walls. I must have read it in here. Let's see. Nyarlathotep is essentially a... Well... Yeah, it's good. Ex Oblivione is essentially a quasi-poem. Nyarlathotep is too. It's quasi-poetic. Herbert West Reanimator, I'm actually enjoying. I can tell you I'm only a quarter of the way through the first story of it. There was a cool little bit in the Fear of the Unknown about Herbert West. I gotta recommend that one really highly. If you guys are Lovecraft fans or want to know more about Lovecraft, check out that documentary. It's all available. I think it's available unbroken on YouTube. So yeah. So next time I'm going to continue with History of Horror. I'm going to go backwards another section, 1900 to 1915. This would be the first half of the silent movie era. Maybe not the earliest movies, which would be back to 1895, but the bulk of the, when they go up to speed in the silent movie era. The first half of the silent movie era, then further back, in the 1800 back we'll talk about. Maybe I'll just do a pre-Poe video. I'm not sure how I'm going to break up that section. And then I'll talk about of course, authors in Shill from the first decade and a half of the 20th century. Yeah. Alright, folks. So we're going to talk about history of horror next time. My name is Drew. Thanks for watching Horror Analysis. I'll see you next time.